Hello, everybody. Rick Manning, President Americans for Limited Government here, talking about something that's really exciting that's happened here in Washington, D.C. Kevin McCarthy, Speaker Kevin McCarthy in the House, did announce that the legislation called the Limit, Save, Grow Act of 2023 has been introduced. This is the debt ceiling regulate or law. This is the law that the House is going to try to pass that will allow the debt ceiling to be increased by $1.5 trillion. In exchange for actually passing some reforms to the government and spending cuts to the government, as well as, guess again, really shocker, some actual reforms in how government operates. It is an extraordinary piece of legislation in that for months, Americans for Limited Government and others have been calling on the House to come up with legislation that had substantive reforms to the way the government operates, the restrictions and stranglehold government regulations, the Biden regulations they've been putting on the energy industry, the stranglehold the Biden administration has been putting on the entirety of our private sector economy through regulatory excess. And this, as well as cutting the size and scope of government through cutting the growth of government significantly. And that's what this does. And at some levels, I'm going to show you some numbers, but there's a little bit of apples and oranges because the president's budget, President Biden's budget that we're going to compare it to, doesn't have the same baseline. And the reason it doesn't have the same baseline number in the same fiscal year, and the reason is Joe Biden counted his outlays things like, gee whiz, we're going to give $400 billion away to people who weren't paying their student loans. And we're going to lower the student loan debt by $400 billion. This legislation specifically prohibits that, the McCarthy legislation. But because Joe Biden's budget counts that money as being spent, and the House and this House version doesn't count that money as being spent, you're comparing, and along with a number of other items like Afghanistan and the like, Afghanistan and now Ukraine. Those are all, so the numbers are a little bit different, but I think we can do enough of a compare and contrast to make it make sense to you. The good news is, and I want to make this clear, the good news is this bill, this legislation that Kevin McCarthy and the House Republicans are hopefully going to pass next week, this legislation is a good starting point in trying to get our budget situation under control, our fiscal house in order. The reason it's only a starting point is, as Robert has explained in the past, and we've written numerous times, the problem the hole we've dug ourselves into is not an easy hole to dig out of. And the discretionary spending that we're talking about doesn't include Social Security, doesn't include Medicare, doesn't include food stamps, doesn't include anything like that. And as a result, doesn't count Medicaid. So as a result, it doesn't account for about 65 to 70% of the total budget of total spending of the U.S. government. So we're dealing with a relatively small percentage of the spending, but we're dealing with it in a constructive way, in a way that's reasonable, and a way I think most people can understand and say, wait a second, that is not a massive, that's not something that shouldn't be done. If it was up to me, I'd zero out a lot of stuff and we'd be getting to balance in about 3 weeks. But bottom line is, to get the 218 votes in the House that Kevin McCarthy needs to get, and to give hopefully the Senate Republicans a baseline platform to fight from as the Biden administration seeks to get 60 votes in the Senate for an alternative solution, which is what they'll push. This gives us a platform to fight from, and it's a platform worth fighting from. So it's not just garbage. Let's take a look at what the president's budget was. Here's the president. I'm going to just click onto this. Here's the president's budget. I'm not going to show you the whole thing because it's like 500 pages, but I will go down to what the baseline is, what the expected spending is for a year. Okay. That's kind of like without any additional spending, just what the anticipated regularly operating expenditures for the year would be. And in the president's baseline, you have let's see if I can get this to get bigger. Oops, wrong way. In the president's baseline, it goes back to 2022. It says in 2022, you have $1.66 trillion spent in discretionary programs. That's defense It's non-defense, but not Social Security and the things we'd already outlined. It starts at in 2022 at $1.66 trillion. By the time you get to 2033, it's $2.2 trillion. So you have a full $550 trillion, $570 trillion increase from 2022, which is 2 years ago, or 1 year ago in this fiscal year, to 2033. The 2033 budget, the president's budget for 2033, projects a $50 trillion budget deficit, or $50 trillion national debt. $50 trillion national debt. It's $18 trillion of additional debt on America, on you and me, based on President Biden's anticipated baseline projections. So to give you some sense, you've got 1.66 in 23, which is this year, 1.736, so that's a $70 billion increase. 2024, 1.872, that's a good $150 billion increase. 2025, 1.888, which is just a $15 billion increase. 2026, 1.92. So let's just go over and see what the House proposal would do, because I think that's that's where we want to take a look. And what the House would do, 2024, it'd be 1.47 trillion, because what they're doing is they're rolling back to what the budgeted money, not extra money that was spent, but the budgeted money was for 2022. And they're saying that's where we're going to start this thing. We're not going to accept, we're going to roll it back to 2022, essentially one fiscal year. And we're going to, so in 2024, we're going to put in, you can spend $1.47 trillion. And from there, you get 1.485. And here's the significant part: fiscal year 2026, $1.5 trillion. Remember, fiscal year 2022 for Biden was 1.6 trillion. You don't get above to 1.6 trillion until fiscal year 33 under the Kevin McCarthy plan. That's real substantive cuts. That's real substantive. There's still government's still growing, but it's a substantive change in the expectations of the growth of government. And when you change the expectations of the growth of government, you change how much money gets allocated for different projects. The Congress can still say, well, defense is a bigger priority, so we're going to continue to grow defense at 10%. But that means they're going to have to cut other aspects of this discretionary budget to make that work. Guess what, folks? You know what this does? It forces Congress to do exactly what you have to do in your household when you discover, hey, wait a second, I really want to make sure my kid is in, let's say that they go to a private school. And you say, well, what aren't we going to be able to do? Well, maybe we can't take vacation this year. Maybe we can't go and go on a missions trip. There's lots of things you can say I'm not going to do. You have to, maybe we're not going to buy a new car for another year or two. All sorts of deferred payments, all sorts of changes in what you choose. You all make those individual decisions every single day in your life. Government never does. They just go ahead and think that there's a never-ending money tree. That what Kevin McCarthy is doing with this is he is effectively sending a message that the House of Representatives says the money tree is out of money. And we have to start trimming our sails a little bit here. And nobody's going to tell me that $1.5 trillion isn't enough. The question is, how are they going to spend it and have to set priorities? And imagine that members of Congress elected by you to manage the fiscal House of America have to actually set priorities for what's important in America, what things should be spent and what things shouldn't be spent. So just looking at this number, you can all see it. I've got to get my thing over here. Looking at this number, you got a little bit of weird stuff going on there, but what you have is a top number of fiscal year 33, 1.608. Going back to the president's budget, if you remember, in 2033, 2.2 trillion. In 2033 alone, these two budgets is over a $600 billion difference. The McCarthy budget would put us well, we'd still have an increased national debt. Okay, folks, that's the reality. But we would be well under 50 trillion. We're probably down, it probably puts it around 46 trillion. Still too much growth. But remember, with a 5-vote majority in the House and a 0-vote majority in the Senate and a Democrat president, it's really, really difficult to get the kind of cuts we need to get to where we want to go. So let's go to the next stage of this. One of the things we're hoping that you will do is tell Congress to support it. And we sent out just before we sent this email out, the email on this out. Those of you who are subscribed to Americans for Limited Government, who get our emails, you have an email in your inbox urging you to contact Congress to tell Congress to pass the Limit, Save, Grow Act. And I'm hoping that while you're doing this, you'll go onto your emails, and while you're don't leave this, but while you're going to go on your emails, you click on it, you check it out, and you send a note to Congress. And folks, most importantly, share this effort. We have to overwhelm Congress with support for this bill. The reason we have to overwhelm Congress with support for this bill, and it's also in the description of this video that you all have. The reason we have to do this is very simple. Kevin McCarthy needs to have affirmation in the House, and the House Republicans are going to take a lot of grief because they're taking on the establishment. They're taking on the administrative state here, but they also need the Senate Republicans in particular, but also people like John Tester and Joe Manchin and Christian Sinema and a number of other Democrat senators up for election in 2026. They need to be hearing from their constituents that this is something that needs to be done. They need to get some urgency that, hey, folks, we are going off a cliff at 60 miles an hour. If we don't hit the brakes really hard, we are going to be doomed as a country. That's what they have to hear. This provides that to them, and we've made it easy for you. But the people on this video, the people we've sent this out to, I can normally expect about 2,000, 2,500 emails in on our average take action. We need to kick this out to every single person out there. Share this video, share the link to this to the take action, because folks, we are in a battle for the life of America right now. This is the battle for the next 6 months. This is the battle that we have to win. If we don't win this battle, if the Republicans crumble and collapse, and we end up with a clean debt ceiling being released with what basically just says rubber stamps, move forward as planned, keep spending money without any thought. If we have that, we will lose a generational opportunity to make a difference here. Let me show you some other things that are really cool concepts within the Limit, Save, and Grow. First of all, this is the actual summary of the bill, and I'm going to just read it to you. Actually, no, that's not what the summary is. This is a summary. There's something called the REINS Act. This bill includes the REINS Act into it. The REINS Act makes it so if the government passes a rule, puts a regulation into place, Congress has to actually approve it. And a major rule is considered anything that spends more than costs more than $100 million or more in terms of costs associated with it. And so this puts a brake on some of these regulations that have massive costs to the public, massive costs in terms of increased prices and the like, because of denying the ability to have oil production, for instance. And it makes it so Congress, if you're effectively going to put a regulatory tax on the public, Congress has to approve it. And so the REINS Act makes that clear. It works, it's a two-way street. The Democrats are in control of the Republican president, and it's a rulemaking that has costs associated with it. A Republican president would be subject to the same exact problems. But it makes it so Congress has to essentially say to the executive branch, we approve this regulation. And given the fact that regulations are nothing more than extensions of laws that Congress passed, this is a logical thing to have happen to reassert the authority of the Article I branch of government, which is for the last 50 years has essentially said, nothing we can do, it's the regulators, don't blame us. Well, by putting the REINS Act into this bill and forcing a discussion about it with the Senate, with the president, what this does is it effectively gives Congress real oversight, real honest oversight over the regulatory agenda and the regulatory regime of the President of the United States. The President of the United States is to execute the laws, but bottom line is because this puts a cost involved, and it establishes that there's a regulatory tax for regulations that have real cost to the public. That's where we get the capacity to roll those back. This is immensely important. And we're going to get to have a discussion and a fight on it, folks. If you like limited government, if you are supporting limited government, rolling back the size and scope of government, the REINS Act is for you, and it's inside this debt limit. So what Kevin McCarthy is saying, not only do we need to roll back the spending, but we also need to be able to stop basically the regulators, the administrative state, from being able to run over all of America and create massive cost increase with absolutely no approval by Congress. So this is incredibly essential to getting anything done. So those are a couple of things in it. One of the other things that's in the bill. This is once again is the press release that we put out yesterday supporting it, where we call it one of the most substantial proposals to limit the size and scope of government last decade, with their debt ceiling and spending cut legislation as a true path back to fiscal sanity. This is one of the things it does that we talk about here is it goes back and it actually, I'm going to go down a little bit here. I'm going to take this down. This is the fact sheet put up by the Speaker's office. I'm going to go all the way to the bottom. HR 1. HR 1 passed the House last week, maybe 2 weeks ago. And it's the bill that basically rolls back a lot of the energy regulations that the Biden administration put into place, designed to make it so permitting for oil and natural gas exploration becomes extremely difficult. What the Biden administration did somewhat sneakily is a lot of the permits that had been approved or were pretty far along in the approval process. The Biden administration said, wait a second, we're going to do a new review on those permits. And they rolled back all the permit reviews back to ground zero, back to the first starting point of those permit reviews. And then they sat on them and wouldn't do anything. So companies, they bid, they leased federal land to be able to drill on. And then they weren't permitted to drill. And then the Biden administration said, well, we've got all this land leased, but nobody's drilling. What's the problem? The problem was Biden wouldn't let them drill. So what this does is it streamlines the permit processes and allows for and rolls back a lot of the garbage that Biden did to stop drilling, to basically not allow energy production in this country and to stymie it, rolls those back. And so the regulatory attack on American energy independence will be rolled back in this bill. We all know that American energy independence is key to our fiscal growth, key to our economic growth. So it does that. It takes the energy sector and says, we can fight over whether you're going to have oil, natural gas, coal, wind, solar, all that stuff. We can have that fight. But what we're not going to do is we're not going to destroy American energy independence on a social welfare whim. On the altar of climate change. We're not going to do that. We're no longer going to commit economic suicide through plans that would force people into electric cars without having the ability to create enough electric cars due to the lack of resources to do so to meet the public demand. We're not going to do that. We're going to end that garbage. We're going to allow for honest competition between different types of vehicles, honest competition between different types of energy resources. And we're going to create an environment where, we might be able to convince some of the actual oil refiners to build a new refinery or two so we can actually refine the oil that we put here, that we take out of our ground and refine it for domestic use and become even more energy independent. That's that's one of the things we need to be able to do. It's not directly in this, but it does put a direct rollback of the problems that the roadblocks Biden administration has thrown into domestic energy production. So that's and that was HR 1. HR 1 is significant because that means that bill was the top priority of Kevin McCarthy's speakership, was getting that done. Kevin McCarthy represents a district with a lot of oil production in it. A lot of oil production that's being cut off by the state of California, truthfully. But this is a direct response to say, no, you're not. The federal government is not going to participate and cut the throat of America by making us dependent upon countries that don't like us very much. That's absurd. It's always been absurd. It's been a goal of this country to stop that. And we finally achieved energy independence. And then we elect Biden to be president. And what we get is back into the soup, being dependent upon countries that don't like us. Once again, that is insane. We might as well just slit our wrists and bleed out, because the faster death of slitting your wrist is sometimes better than the slow death of being strangled over time. So you eventually don't have any oxygen in your lungs and you die, because that's what the Biden energy policy is. It's designed to strangle us until we die as a country. I'm going to start taking some questions here and say, Florida Girl, thank you for taking action. Truly appreciate it. Please share this with everybody you can get a hold of, because it truly matters. This is a fight worth fighting. This is the fight for the fiscal sanity of this country. We've really not sent many take actions out this year. And we haven't because, quite honestly, if something we didn't think it was going to make a difference, I wasn't going to waste your time. There's a lot of things I could send out that are kind of fluff. And I'll send some stuff out like that where I think it matters to take a stand. But by and large, this is from a legislative perspective. This is a big deal, and we need you guys, every single one of you, to be jumping into it. Let's see here. One rep per state, period. Okay, I don't know what that means. Yeah, good luck with Trader Joe. Valerie, I'm gonna talk about that because I think it's important. You say good luck with Trader Joe, and I can't disagree with you in terms of dealing with Biden. Let me tell you, he's made a big deal out of not about the full faith and credit of the United States on the debt ceiling. This battle is really in the Senate. Okay, if Kevin McCarthy can muster 218 votes in the House, and I think he will, because he wouldn't have put it up if he didn't have the votes, then the question becomes, what is McConnell going to do? The Democrats have to get, actually now they have to get 10 Republicans, because Dianne Feinstein's not available. She's sick and unable to attend work. So they now need to get 10 Republicans to get to 60, which means the Republicans have all the cards in terms of being able to negotiate in the House and in the Senate. By pushing this baseline bill over, it gives whoever's negotiating on the Republican side, Mitch McConnell, a tremendous amount of leverage to be able to get something to force onto Biden, real changes, real reforms, and real cuts. That's the opportunity. Plus, you have Joe Manchin, who's going to support the HR 1 support of it. He may support REINS Act part of it. He may not agree with the total budget cut on it, but the fact of the matter is, there's things in this House bill that Joe Manchin's going to want. And so you sit there and you look at it and you say, okay, well, so you pull Manchin off from them. So now they need 11 Republicans. If you pull, a guy like Tester from Montana, who's up for election, if he wasn't up for election, you wouldn't get him, but he is up for election. If you pull Tester off of this, at that point, they need 12 Republicans. So this is an opportunity to really leverage the political system that's been leveraged against us for years and years and years, because we didn't control the House when Nancy Pelosi was sending things over to the Senate, and we were in a narrow majority, and we'd end up having to deal with the Democrats basically being a wrecking ball to doing anything constructive. This gives us the chance, because holding the House matters, because we get to fire the first shot. Let Joe Biden complain and cry and all that. My whole premise here is the House does their work. They tell the Senate, now do yours. If the Senate takes it up and says, no, we're not, and votes it down, I don't care. The bottom line is they then have to put their own package together. And the House has told the Senate, here's what we'll vote for. Let the Senate do their work, figure out what they'll vote for. And then the House and the Senate can get together and say, well, where are we going to find a middle ground? And any middle ground we find will include cuts, and will include changes to how the administrative procedures work in this country. That is such a massive change. And then, Joe Biden, you know what he can do? He can figure out if he's going to veto it or not. They'll be trying to butt in the Senate. There's no doubt. I don't care what Joe Biden thinks. I don't care. And the Republicans should not care what Joe Biden thinks. They should do what's in the best interest of the country, put it on Joe Biden's desk, and make it his problem. If he wants to default on the nation's debt, that's his problem. He's the one who has to veto it. If he's going to veto something that's going to default on the debt, well, then that's a choice he makes. Bottom line on this is Republicans are now taking the aggressive, the front lines. They're taking the fight. They're actually setting the agenda, and that's what they need to do throughout this two-year time, while Biden struggles around chewing on his cud. We have to have Republicans in the House setting the agenda, not just for 2023 and 2024, but for 2025, because we set the agenda now. Biden fights against it, and we beat his brains in over it because the actions you guys take, and we end up with somebody else as president, a Republican as president. We end up with a Republican majority in the Senate. We hold a Republican majority in the House and perhaps extend the gains. At that juncture, we then have a platform to run on and to jam down their throats in the first 100 days. So, folks, this is a plan. This works, but we have to have a House that's just rock solid. And so far, Kevin McCarthy's done a great job of putting this bill together. I don't think you've seen me this enthusiastic about anything that he's done. This is what we've needed. Let's talk to Biden thinks it's free candy handing out to, we're handing out a lot of free candy to Ukraine. There's no doubt. Let's see what Betsy Burns says. That's McCarthy does tell his plan. It doesn't have a bunch of stupid earmarks on it. I will tell you, we'll still have to be very diligent when the appropriators get to do their work, because that's where that stuff shows up. But the fact of the matter is, by setting baselines, by setting the amounts that the Democrats, that the appropriators in the House and the Senate can spend on a bipartisan basis, by cutting those amounts, when you have heavy competition for the money, the butterflies are less likely to get their $2 million, because somebody else say, I need that $2 million for doing something else. And you have a much greater competition for the spending, and the greater competition for the spending that exists, the pencils get sharpened, and you end up with actual spending cuts and less frivolous, stupid stuff that gets spent. Let's see here. Where to grow? I really think that Congress only get paid when they show up and actually do some work. Term limits, when they leave office, that's it. No more for that dollars for them. I think that's quite honestly, the congressional pension system should be on the table. But if you're going to take the pension system, then you also have to take away the limitations on their lobbying for 5 years, because I'll just tell you, the best members of Congress who I know are the ones who actually need the job. They're not super wealthy. They're not operating off of their own, their trust fund. They are people who are they understand more about real people's concerns about making a budget. And so those members who fit that category, that description, are far more, in my estimation, are far more in touch with the reality that you and I have. And they're much less likely just to blow money on stupid stuff, on luxuries. People who don't have to worry about their own bottom line aren't going to worry about yours. And the fact is, making certain that people who are going to spend the productive years of their life in Congress and they make good money. They make over $170,000 a year. But those people are able to afford to have the job. And it is, I'm not making excuses for them, but the fact is they do have to have two households generally, and there are other expenses. So if we're going to cut their pension, we either have to raise their pay or we have to do something really crazy. And that is, how about just going off and you lift the lobbying limits, they leave, they can lobby, but they have to disclose everything. And, if there's a tie between their lobbying and their voting, and you can show that they're getting paid before they became the lobbyists, well, then they go to jail. So in terms of term limits are a good idea. in general. The problem we have with term limits, and I'm back and forth on them. Um, I'm just really concerned that a lot of places with term limits, like California, for instance, the system is spun completely out of control because suddenly you've got people who are going to be there for 3 terms in the assembly in California, and they got to make their money in the 3 terms. So so you end up with a lot more horse trading and a lot a lot less institutional knowledge about the downside of doing really stupid stuff. And so a lot of stupid stuff's being done in California in a term limit environment. So term limits doesn't solve all the problems. Electing people who aren't insane solves the most of the problems. And I'm from California originally, and I just want you to know that when I left California, the Republicans were in control. So it's not my fault that California is out of control. It's the people I left behind who were supposed to take care of it when I came here to Washington, D.C. to try to fix this place. Let's see what we got. We all know whatever Republicans put forth, Democrats shoot down because they're greedy as hell. They do not care about American people. Mahana, I will tell you, I think generally speaking, what you said is true. I also know that there are, I'll give you an example. Today in the House, legislation came on the floor that basically said, if you're a man, you can't compete in women's sports in college. That it's no more complicated than that. And 219 Republicans voted in favor of that legislation, and not a single Democrat did. So you have to believe that every Democrat in the House of Representatives believes that men should be able to destroy women's sports, take scholarships from women athletes, and that somehow the concept that biological men in peak condition are not stronger than biological women in peak condition. Well, that's what the Democrats are trying to tell us. We know that's not true. Serena Williams herself said back in like 2013 that if she played Andy Murray, who was another, he won Wimbledon in 2013. Serena won Wimbledon in 2013. Serena is probably the greatest American female athlete in history. We can go back in time. We can argue it with some really phenomenal Babe Zaharias and others. But she's certainly up there, and certainly, and I think she is the best women's tennis player in history. I think most people agree to that. So, but Serena said she'd lose 6-0, 6-0 to Andy Murray, who is a top 5 men's player. She said men's tennis and women's tennis are completely different games. It's not me talking. That's Serena Williams. She would know. So given that, forcing college girls to have to go off and compete against college boys who are in top physical condition is dangerous. It's stupid as denial of reality. But yet the Democrats went off and said, no, we want to do that. So that is an example, Mohana, of making the exact point you made. That if the Republicans said that the sky is blue, the Democrats would say, we disagree, and would vote it down. Boyd McLaughlin, how much money can we save if the Communist Biden administration does give money to illegal aliens to come here, get paid to do nothing? Why and how? That's a great question. I haven't seen the actual numbers. I do know this. I know that there are that we're looking at about 35,000 a piece in terms of benefits that are available. Those are benefits that are not supposed to legally be available. And how many people in the illegal alien community who come across are taking advantage of those benefits, I can't answer. But I will look it up for you because I know it's substantial. Something we've been harping on, and I would encourage you to look at dailytorch.com. And if you have not subscribed to dailytorch.com, go there, dailytorch.com, and subscribe. And that way you get our email newsletter every single day, 5 days a week. And you get and we have a lot of in-depth analysis of things. One of the things we've been harping on quite a bit the last couple of months has been Medicaid, which is supposed to be health care for the poorest of the poor, to make sure nobody, it's the social safety net. That during COVID, there was a change in the rules, and people who were eligible because they lost their jobs at the beginning of COVID, they were not eligible to be taken off of COVID, off of the Medicaid for 3 years. And that just ended. So we now have, for the first time in 3 years, states could be booting people who are ineligible off of Medicaid. It's estimated that there are about 20 million additional people who joined Medicaid because of that. It's estimated that that costs about $200 billion. So simply by restoring Medicaid to only people who are eligible, you could save $150 billion a year in Medicaid expenses. And when we're talking about the kind of numbers we're talking about, that's one way to get your budget under control, is actually only give Medicaid to people who are eligible. For those of you who are in states like Alabama, where the state legislature is considering expanding Medicare eligibility from 200 to 300% of poverty, let me just tell you what that means. 300% of poverty level means for a family of four, means that if you make $83,000 a year as a family of four, you are eligible for Medicaid. The fact is, Medicaid has become a middle class social welfare program because of that change that is directly off of Obamacare. But now a lot of the remaining Republican states that haven't signed up for it are beginning to look to sign up for it. It's a mistake. It's a massive fiscal error. And if I were going to talk to Congress about something that they should do, they should at least cut that number back to 250%. Because if we can't do that, if we can't get it cut to 250%, that would save lots of money. It would save hundreds of millions of dollars. And as a result, it's another way of cutting the expenditures without hurting the lowest people in the social economic standard. It takes, we need to end middle class welfare. If we don't end middle class, and I know people don't like it called that, but the fact of the matter is, if you're making $83,000 a year, it's really hard to say, gee whiz, your government, the taxpayer should be subsidizing your health care. So that's so that's just one example of things that can be done. Let's see here. Just think how much money is going into the welfare system: food stamps, free Obama cell phones, housing for all. Yeah, we've been talking about housing for a while. And Mohan, I'm not going to go down that path right now, but I would encourage you to look up some of the housing proposals that Americans for Limited Government has. One of them is very simple: is to take our whole public housing system and privatize it. And so if you live if you're a legal resident of the United States and you live in public housing, that housing becomes yours. The federal government, the taxpayers are no longer responsible. We're out of the business. We don't have to maintain them. We don't have to do anything. It's your property. You do with it as you please. There's a lot of nuances to that and a lot of different ways of approaching it. And truthfully, Robert and I don't totally see eye to eye on what should be done and where. But the fact of the matter is, that's the kind of proposal that is radical, but it's exactly what it was done in Eastern Europe, where nobody had a house. It was all government owned. And the Polish government, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, said, what do? We've got all these people in public housing, and we don't want to have all these people in public housing. What did they do? They said, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to give them the house and make it theirs and create private property. Imagine the idea of people who are living in public housing suddenly owned it. Bet they'd upkeep it. I bet they'd make sure it was clean. I bet you they'd sit there and make sure that anything that was a drug den would be that they'd be booted out, because when you own something, you care about it a lot more than if you're just there and you can move to the next public housing unit that might be in a better place. So anyway, so there's some stuff. Once again, go to getliberty.org or dailytorch.com and check out some of the articles there. That we've got a whole bunch of articles on housing over time. I think you'll find them interesting. We've given some real deep thought to that, and I think it's something that needs to be done, and it's part of limiting government that I think would dramatically change public housing in America, because we'd eliminate it and we'd re-privatize the housing system in America, which desperately needs to be done. I'm gonna kind of close it off now and just thank you for attending. And going back to the premise, please, we need to fight like crazy. We need to fight like crazy to get the pass the Limit, Save, and Grow Act. And anything you can do in that fight would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much, and have a great day.